What is up, everybody? This is the Crap Big Gamer, and we are doing another this time a top 10 greatest villains of all time in my personal opinion. So not what experts would agree on, but my personal opinion, based on all the games that I have played and over the course of my, I'd say I'm about a 28-year career when it comes to playing video games. I was about 4 or 5-ish when I played my first video games on the Super Nintendo. Hence why you can see the very first picture on the list. So in 28 years, these are the villains that stood out to me. You'll notice a pattern, a couple patterns, but one of them is I'm really into well-developed villains. I'm not saying Bowser is not a well-developed villain. Believe it or not, I actually don't have a lot of Mario games. Most of them actually all of them are pre Nintendo 64. So Super Nintendo, Nintendo, and then the Famicom system. And I only ever finished one, which is the game you're looking at right now on your screen. So I've actually only really experienced Bowser this one time. Excuse me. But I know that Bowser, for a lot of people, is a really iconic villain character. It's the reason why he's on my list. But just keep in mind that I am basing this, again, on my personal experience. If you happen to be watching this, and if you feel so inclined to show your top 10 lists, by all means, that would be really interesting. I would love to see. I have never played the Xbox games, so anything that's an Xbox related thing, I'm not going to know. The Halos and Gears of War and all that stuff, I'm not going to understand any of that. But I just want everyone to keep in mind that that is the point of any of these lists that I do. I did my top consoles of all time. That one was just because I just did all the consoles that I had, minus the Nintendo GameCube, which I did not own, but I did experience enough that I felt it was warranted to be on the list. I did want to throw out some honorable mentions, because this was actually really not easy. Originally I thought, I'll just do a top 20, and then I was kind of getting stuck on finding 20 people that were worthwhile. So I decided, let's try to make this a top 10. So these are the people that almost made the list. I'm also trying not to saturate a list with one specific game. There are a couple games that have incredible villains, and that's because the games are well constructed, the storylines are well made, the characters are well developed. I tried not to do that. So there are some characters in this honorable mention that easily can make this list, but I wanted to try to make it as varied as possible and really scrutinize, what these particular villainous characters, meant to me as a gamer throughout my years. But these are easily, incredible villains within themselves. So first off is Nobunaga Oda, which is actually a real-life warlord way back during the Warring States era in Japan. And my first experience with him was not through the history books, because why the hell would Americans focus on that? It's pretty sad. But he was he wasn't really the main villain in the first game, but he technically was the main villain in the second one. And that is the Onimusha 1 and Onimusha 3 series. In particular, in Onimusha 3, he was a fucking badass dude. He was so cool. I loved the armor he had. The voice actor that did him, he did a great job. I loved his sword, like that whip sword thing. That thing was so dope. Eric Romer, who I guess was technically the main bad guy, even though Markinson was technically the main bad guy in some ways. But Romer was kind of a big deal. You didn't get to interact with him too much, Honestly, I would probably put Anton Gurdu ahead of... Oh, I probably should have done that one. In terms of boss fights, maybe if I do a boss fight one, Anton Gurdu is definitely going to be among them. But Romer was super cool because, you know, growing up, you just utilized brute force whenever you could to take on a boss, you know, with some sense of discipline. But Romer required a specific strategy, and that was one of the first times where I had to sit there and realize, oh, I have to use a certain weapon and find a certain moment, especially because he's running around with a freaking grenade launcher from the Vietnam era. And yeah, you had to hit him with a gas grenade, and I thought that was one of the coolest moments. And then beating him was a it's not hard. I mean, all you have to do is just hit him with the damn gas grenade, but you gotta find that right moment, and that was a cool moment for me as a video gamer. Next is Kyozuro Kagenuma. She is from Way of the Samurai 2. Loved Way of the Samurai 2. Way of the Samurai 1 was great, but Way of the Samurai 2 definitely expanded upon it. I've never played 3. I actually haven't gone beyond that. I would love to do that. I've been keeping on my eye out for the game. But you know, you kind of feel like you're hot shit, and you kind of understand how the game works. And then if you piss her off, you take a blade in the gut, shakes it around, and kicks your ass to the ground, and then you're pretty much toast. She's no joke. She's creepy as hell. But the first time you beat her and you get her sword is a kind of a weird, morbid moment, but it was pretty awesome. And then she's still a challenge, even, you know, for, you know, with subsequent playthroughs. I always gave her a lot of respect, so she's on there. Pagan Min, I really genuinely, in terms of, like, you'll see with some of these villains, they're kind of hard to hate, which may not necessarily be the best characteristics for a villain. Pagan Min was really hard to hate. Troy Baker did a I mean, Troy Baker's a goddamn legend, but he did a great job. And don't worry, he is on this list. Troy Baker is actually on this list, but he did a great job with Pagan Min. I agree with a lot of people. Pagan should have been on this in this game a lot more than anybody was, but I wonder if in some ways it kind of would have detracted from the charm of him. Like, you looked forward to the conversations, excuse me, you would have with him, or he would have with you, I guess. And it was even more built up because you're supposedly your two allies, or eventually one would become an enemy, the other would be the ally, but Sabal and Amida ended up being kind of scumbags, and so Pagan was kind of like the lesser of both evils in some regards. Great character, absolutely amazing character. It's just I never looked at him as a villain. Like, I actually enjoyed being in his company a hell of a lot more than Sabal and Amida, which in my opinion would be better villains than Pagan Min. Incredible Crisis, I was actually just going to do the entire game. But I'll put that in probably my like greatest video game moment sort of thing. But that whole game is a villain within itself. It is a pain in the ass. The controls are not always spot on. It's hard. It's taxing on the body, but conquering that thing is pretty awesome. Pokemon in the Pokemon Indigo Plateau. So the final Elite Four. I really came close to putting them on here, but technically, I guess his original name was Blue. But I'm pretty certain you're allowed to choose the name of or his name. I actually can't remember what I named him in my game, if that was even a possibility. I really don't remember. I'm pretty certain you could, but I guess he would be the better villain choice. I was just going to go with the Elite Four because I kind of got hyped up so much, and you were like, oh my god, this is the end of the game, and you need to beat these guys. And again, you know, bosses, especially during that time period, prior to that, bosses were had set patterns, and all you had to do is just, you know, avoid those offensive patterns and then attack the defensive patterns before they could get really defensive. This game, with these guys, you had to have a strategy going into it. You had to make sure you were ready for it, and I really enjoyed that. Like, you had to really be ready for that. And so I was going to include them, but I decided not to. Psycho Mantis, an incredible villain. I wish he would have been in... He is kind of in the series longer than the first game, but I wish he would have been in it longer. A lot of people put him in their top list just for the battle. But as a character, I thought even for that brief moment, they did a great job of just putting a lot of info on you. And he made wearing a gas mask look really cool. Definitely one of my favorite, and I'll probably do a list on that, but definitely one of my favorite Metal Gear villains of all time. Abstergo, which is the organization that you are going up against pretty much as of up to now. I haven't played Valhalla yet. In the Assassin's Creed series, I was going to include them, but then I thought, I don't want to do a whole organization. Nicole Horn was one that I really... These next three I actually really struggled with, but Nicole Horn, which was the original antagonist in the first Max Payne. I have a shirt that says "Shut Up, Karen," and it's got a cat that's like screaming. And Nicole Horn, I think, was my first Karen I ran into in video games in some ways. And just that kind of greasy, made your spine shiver kind of entitled... Not just a woman, just like those kind of characters in general. Boy, it felt so good to drop a freaking radio antenna on top of her helicopter. That was one of my favorite video game moments as well. That was such a cool sequence. That was so enjoyable. Dusan Nemec, who is the main antagonist in Watch Dogs 2, which is one of my favorite games of all time. He has a spiritual counterpart that actually made the list. I really thought about including him, but you don't get to see enough of him, sadly. But they did that voice actor and Ubisoft did a great job of making him look exactly like a number of ultra entitled freaking Bay Area tech giant owner, blah blah whatever. Because I've delivered to a lot of them when I used to work for Postmates. Man, they did such a good job on that one. He is a total freaking douchebag. So great use of the name too, Dusan Nemec. And then lastly, Dr. Harlan Fontaine from L.A. Noire. I actually have a L.A. Noire alumni on here. More interestingly, is I have Dr. Harlan Fontaine's voice actor actually made this list with a different character. So congratulations to him. Peter Bloomquist. Awesome. Underrated voice actor. I mean, Fontaine, you really didn't like Fontaine. Between his southern drawl and the kind of way he carried himself, and it was just like, you kind of wish you could have been the one that either arrested him or whatever. But I thought about adding him to this list, but I'm kind of happy with who I chose. Even though I think, in my opinion, Fontaine was a better villain in terms of hate. A lot of the villains in this list are not people that I necessarily hated so much. There are some, but it was just I like the complicated dynamics of what these particular villains offered. So anyways, those are my honorable mentions. That was kind of a long list. Hopefully it won't be that long in the future, but I apologize. So here we go. Without further ado, here is the actual list itself. So at number 10 on my list is Bowser, as you can see right here, in his happy-go-lucky, what is this, like a hover pod copter thing. I think there's an actual name for it, but I don't remember. For me, this was the first boss that I ever got to experience. I guess true boss. You know, like you get to experience all of his kids. throughout the game. I have a playthrough of all the castles, so you do get to see them. They're not technically my first bosses, but excuse me. But Bowser was the it was the first one that when you finally got to him, and Super Mario World is such a massive game for its time. Working your way all the way to get to him. Let's see, is this who I think it is? Nope. Text here in just a minute. Beating him, and the sad thing is you can see he drops in here. If you've never played it before, he drops these Mecha Koopas, and all you have to do is hit him 6 times with them. But there's 3 phases, that you have to go through. But for a character that all you have to do is hit him 6 times with with what he's throwing at you, it doesn't seem like much of a battle. So in terms of boss battles, it probably wouldn't necessarily be as high, even though it is a monumentous moment for me, especially as a kid. But there was just, I don't know. I liked the transition between the phases. Like, you saw him wobble up and down in the second phase, and you're like, okay, but when he started smashing the ground in the final phase, oh my god, that was such an exhilarating moment. And now looking back on it, like, I know it's coming. I mean, I've been playing it for quarter of a century since then. But I remember the first time he started smashing the ground, it was like, oh my god, what the hell is this? Those are the kind of things that really stood out to me. But the main reason Bowser ended up making my list is, and again, there's probably so much. I know there's actual interactions with Mario later on, and then I know there was a animated series and whatnot. I didn't follow it. I never got into that kind of stuff. But just that one interaction, this one boss battle, spoke a lot to me about what bosses could end up being in terms of a momentous occasion, like the rush. And there's some tough bosses, some of his kids are pretty tough, but this was one of the first moments where my heart would like beat 1,000 miles an hour, hoping to finally beat him. And yeah, but Bowser being technically my first true final boss, I guess that's a good way to put it. Final boss and first real villain. Like main villain, I guess I should say, is why he is number 10 on my list. And number 9 is Super Shredder from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo. Excuse me. Brilliant game, just within itself, and a number of great villains in that one. One of the big things for me is, especially with these early games, is you don't develop a huge connection to the villains. I know I've seen the Ninja Turtle live action movies. Kind of watched some of the cartoons. Again, I know that there's this huge. For me, the big thing was because I did see the live action. I did appreciate further down the line the interaction between Shredder and understand his background versus Splinter's, so on and so forth. And I love the second movie, Secret of the Ooze, is one of my favorite movies of all time, especially because there is Super Shredder in it, which I believe was a famous wrestler played him. What was it? Not Razor Ramon. What the hell is that guy's name? Not the guy that is Razor Ramon. What the hell is that other dude's name? He was part of NWO. Oh shit! Now where's Lou when you need him? But anyways, I believe he played he was the body double for Super Shredder. But I remember the first time because my sister and I mentioned I think I mentioned in the comments when I did my playthrough that my sister and I would play this together. It was one of the few games that my sister and I would actually play together. And I remember I would sit there and try to explain to her, hey, this is the strategy we're going to do against him. And then just recently when I played it again, I don't think I ever got hit by him. His pattern, I mean, I'm sure it's different in like super, hard mode or whatever, but his pattern is pretty straightforward, and he actually is not as tough as I thought. There's a number of other bosses in this game that are harder, in my opinion. Their patterns are hard to recognize. But when he steps on that platform and changes, and the music and everything, and then you saw him and you're like, oh shit. It was such a cool moment. So definitely one of the best boss intros that I remember. And then having the Statue of Liberty just sitting there in the background looking at you like, you gotta fight for freedom. So super cool moment. That's number 9. Number 8 is Lu Frickin' Boo. Now, he's been part of most, if not all, of the Dynasty Warriors series, and then he was also part of the crossover Warriors Orochi series. Now, I know you can utilize him as a character. You can unlock him. But initially, you gotta fight that bastard. And same deal, you'd be sitting there and you'd be hacking and slashing and smashing people and thinking you're the freaking hot shit. And then you run into his ass on the battlefield and he fucks you up. Fucks you up. And I remember, because, you know, a lot of those bosses or generals will leave items and weapons and whatnot behind. And so I always thought, man, if I can just beat this guy, who knows what I might be able to get. And I remember the first time I had to sit there and grind. I would go in and attack him for a bit, run away, you know, try to heal myself up, kill some other like lower generals, come back. And I remember the first time I was able to finally beat him was a huge moment for me, especially in that game. I love the Dynasty War. I only played the Dynasty Warriors 3, but I love the Warriors Orochi series, especially because I like having both the Chinese Three Kingdoms warriors, and then I also like having the Japanese Warring State, Warring State generals, and then also the mystical and mythical characters from both cultures. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy this. Actually, I keep meaning to get the newest one that came out a while back, but it's still expensive, so I should check. It might be cheap finally. Should be what, Warriors Orochi 3 or 4 or something like that. But anyways, Lu Bu was the dude in Dynasty Warriors. He still is the dude nowadays. Between him and Tadakatsu Honda. Excuse me. But yeah, beating him was a big deal for me at the time. And he's one of those people that you don't necessarily have to fight, I think. I don't know if you ever have to really fight against him, because he's just a general on the battlefield. He's not a leader. But anytime you ran into him, it was like, oh shit. So beating him was a big deal. And then finally getting to play him kind of toned down that anger, because it's like, oh, now I get to finally utilize him, you know? So that's why he's up there at number 8. And number 7, and I was really not sure if I wanted to put him on here. His history transcends this particular series, but the Batman Arkham video game series, and it almost feels cliche putting him on this list, because most people know that the Joker is probably one of the greatest villains in villain history. But being that I am a homer, and Mark Hamill is from the Bay Area, actually from the same city that my mother is born in Oakland, California, and how goddamn brilliant Mark Hamill is in voicing the Joker. Just watch the new commercials he's in with Patrick Stewart. When I think it's the one where Patrick Stewart technically cheats and scores on him in air hockey, and he screams that he wasn't ready. That's Joker right there. Joker is another one of those, like I said, you're going to see more of that coming up, is really hard to hate in some ways, because he's the perfect foil to what Batman is. Batman is this stoic, kind of dark, and it's funny to say that about a villain, but Batman is stoic, dark, disciplined, you know, whereas Joker is kind of more lighthearted, chaotic. You know, he literally everything about Joker, and I understand that's how the you know, it's supposed to be, but you don't always get that foil system right. And they did a great job with that, especially with the way Hamill delivers this Joker, and in these games. And genuinely, when Joker dies in was this Arkham City? I think it was Arkham City. It hurt. I mean, that's your biggest rival, you know, one of the main villains of the game, and it hurt. And how many people are Joker fans, you know, to make a villain be that, you know, dynamic and that approachable and relatable in some ways is it's not that I hope not, that we condone violence and needless killing and whatnot, but Batman and Joker kind of represent the two sides of what we as human beings are. You know, the more responsible, stern side, and the more chaotic, childlike side of us. And I think, especially if you're the right age when you play this, I think that strikes a tone with you. It's the youthful, nostalgic childhood, and then the responsibilities of adulthood. And I think that's a great way of utilizing these two characters, in my opinion. And so that's why he's there at number 7. At number 6, this is a whole cluster. This is the only cluster I got. And that is the Colossi of Shadow of the Colossus. And I really couldn't pull one Colossi out. Like, it really wouldn't make much sense. In a way, they are all the villains of the game. I mean, was it Dormi or Dormo? Dormu is kind of like the main bad guy. And it's true. I mean, you have to deal with him as well. But for some reason, the Colossi were villains because they were frustrating as hell when you first tried to learn how to climb them and deal with them. But the fact that they never speak to you, you know, they're kind of just going about doing their business in the end. Like, they're a weird moral middle ground where you're like, it's kind of like hunting. If you're one of those people that, you know, maybe likes to do hunting video games or whatever, but you would never hunt in real life because, you know, animals are just kind of doing their thing. It's like these guys are kind of just, technically they're just kind of going about life doing their own thing, being what they're supposed to be. So I'll try not to spoil that since I spoiled some other stuff. And you're just running around climbing their asses and stabbing a sword into their head or wherever. But there's just something personal about the fact that you have to hunt this guy down, and then you have to sit there, or him or her, I don't know, or it, and you have to sit there and think, how am I going to get up and stab this thing into them? And then the lack of interaction makes it kind of uneasy, and I kind of like that. Like, there's that uneasiness makes, you know, doing what you're doing make you second guess it, especially because of the reason why you're doing it is obviously to help Mono come back to life. But yeah, I don't know. And there are some, especially some of those smaller fucking scraggly ass Colossi where you're like, you don't feel so bad because they're a pain in the asses. But the ones that are really passive, it's kind of hard in some ways to have to take them out because they're just doing, like I said, they're just doing what they're supposed to do. But there are some that you're just like, well, fuck that, pain in the asses. Anyways, at that was number 5, right? So we are now going into the second half of our list, and at number 4, 3, oh no, 5. No, that was 6, right? I should still be doing this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 6. And number 5, so this would be the halfway point right here, is Joseph Seed. And the reason I said that, I had a spiritual equivalent, I guess, in some ways, to Dusan Nemec, the man bun, beard, in sense of entitlement. Joseph Seed, and the voice actor, I actually don't know off the top of my head who the voice actor for Joseph Seed was in Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 5 New Dawn. Did a great job. They did a great job of making this guy, like, you did not like this dude. And I know there's a lot of people, especially in this country. I mean, look at the election, who would side with Mr. Seed, but for a lot of people that are more open-minded about religion and about a lot of things, having a person throw their religion down your throat is not an enjoyable experience, especially if you try to be nice about it, you know, and you sit there and just endure it. And that sense of holier than thou can really grate really fast. I would like to meet someone that feels that they are perfect and have never sinned and never done anything wrong. Not that he sits there and claims that either. But to judge others as a human being doesn't seem right. And he tends to kind of do that because he feels he is above others, because he feels he has more of a connection with God itself. The reason why initially I was pissed because you couldn't choose to kill him or not. I'm sure the first time I would have played, I wouldn't have. I always like to go that route in video games, but the fact that you didn't really get a choice was kind of annoying. New Dawn, which is the DLC that came with Far Cry 5, made me form a new appreciation with him, because they kind of humbled him down a lot and made him a lot more personable and relatable in some aspects as a father, and just as a human being, not this cultist leader. And I thought that really added another layer to what he was as a character. Again, Pagan Min is probably my favorite villain of the Far Cry series, but Joseph Seed was probably the best, or probably the most well constructed of the villains in terms of making you not like them, which is kind of supposed to be the point of villains for the most part. Although it's awesome to make a character that you can kind of question whether they should be the villain. I get that as well. But I thought New Dawn gave him a layer that was needed, and I think that really helped him, and that's why he is at number 5. And number 4 is another character that is the same way, if not even more so, and that is Roy Earl of L.A. Noire, one of my favorite games of all time. It is really fucking hard to hate Roy Earl, but he is also one of the kind of people that if you met him in real life, you know, if you had a person that was a Roy Earl in real life, probably would rub you the wrong way, especially if you're like Cole Phelps. There's so many moments where he's just like the coolest dude in the world, and I love the banter and the humor that he offers, but he also is a sleazy dickhole, and we all know sleazy dickholes in our lives. And God, that voice actor and his facial capture, by the way, same thing. I saw it, but I didn't snag the name, unfortunately. My God, what a great job in that regard. And he just looks the part. Like, no offense to the guy, but he looks like a guy that would be a freaking dickhole, slinging under the table kind of dude. So they did a great job with that, but so hard to hate him at times. And I like that kind of dynamic, you know? You sit there and you go, is this guy really, especially throughout the game, is this guy really that bad, or is he on the level? And even though you kind of knew he was leaning towards being corrupt. Again, he kind of looks like a guy that would be corrupt. But yeah, just the fact that you can replay the game, know what's going to happen, and you're still like, God damn it, I kind of like Roy. That's so cool. I love that kind of stuff. And you're going to see that in the next one, which I know at one point she was #1 on a lot of experts, not mine, but experts list for greatest video game villains of the time, and that is GLaDOS, aka Genetic Lifeform and Disk Operating System. I don't know how many of you knew that. I didn't know that. But that is what GLaDOS stands for, is Genetic Lifeform and Disk Operating System. She is obviously from Portal and then Portal 2. In Portal, you know, she was more of like, yeah, you kind of didn't like her because she screwed you over. Portal is a weird realm because it takes itself serious and it doesn't take itself serious. Like it's a I know a couple people, I'm sure you've met a couple people in their lives that like they don't take themselves seriously, but when they do take themselves seriously, it's with so much couth that you don't really realize they're taking themselves seriously, and I think that's pretty fucking dope to have that much confidence in yourself, I suppose. And GLaDOS is kind of the same way. Voice acting is brilliant as per usual. Portal is a great voice acting game. I mean, they have freaking oh man, shit, I forgot his name. He's in all the Farmers commercials. God damn it. But anyways, come on. I mean, you got him in there. It's all, you know, it's gonna be awesome. But the second game really took the relationship you have with GLaDOS to another level. And again, there's still that banter that made the game so charming in the first one, and then obviously in the second one. But there's those moments where her original self starts to come, I'll say it that way, starts to come into play, and there's a lot of emotion that gets drawn up from that. And so I really it's one of the big reasons why Portal and Portal 2 are so memorable, is just the interaction you have with supposedly your biggest rival, you know, in some regards. And it's kind of a cool thing because it never feels cheesy. Like, it feels, to me, it feels natural, you know, going through the process of this machine that wants to kill you, now you have to work together. It never felt necessarily like it was a smooth transition into having to essentially develop a least friendship or a common mutual goal that you all need to accomplish, you know. But that's why she is at #3. And #2 is a character that you want to hate. But playing this game, this would be I've beaten it 4 times now. At least the main playthrough, the main story. If you think about it, you can kind of rationalize in some way his actions. But man, this voice actor was, which again is Peter Bloomquist, who also played Dr. Harlan Fontaine. Brilliant. Man, he plays such a great dick. And that is Micah Bell, who I guess would technically be the main protagonist or main antagonist of Red Dead Redemption 2. He's a dick from pretty much the get-go, and you hate his guts the whole time, and he's a pain in the ass, and you can tell he's one of those guys that you would just sit there and cringe every time you had to deal with him. From start to finish, you wish you could sit there and shoot him. And then when you beat the game and you know what happens, when you play it the second time, it's even more infuriating because now you know what he's all about. But like I said, there are people that have sat there and debated that, you know, maybe he was one of the more honorable characters in the game in some aspects, blah, 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 and that's pretty cool. There's a layer of him that I haven't actually fully unpeeled yet, but that would be cool to try to do my best. But in terms of the most hated, probably the most hated character that I've run into, Micah Bell is it. And again, Peter Bloomquist is fucking underrated. he has played two characters that you just can't stand, and that is pretty goddamn amazing. So, if for some strange reason Mr. Bloomquist sees this, well done, Mr. Bloomquist. You are a gift, at least to the video game voice acting community, and hopefully I'll get to play more games with you in it. I might have and didn't even know it. I didn't realize he did Dr. Harlan Fontaine, so that was super cool. Now it makes playing L.A. Noire even more interesting. But Micah Bell for me is number 2. And number 1, this really wasn't even a goddamn competition. One of the most, it helps when he's in, 15, no, not even, 20 years worth of games, I guess, that I've gotten to experience. One of the most dynamic characters in all of video games, because he transcends even the title character, or the one that's supposed to be related to the games. But he initially, in the first game that you experience him in, has not necessarily a minor role, but you almost felt like he was just a character that, especially his boss battle. His boss battle was really, really like unique for its time, for sure. And then that's it. And you just figured I thought he was just going to end up being kind of a semi-minor character. And he ends up being, I would argue, actually, I would debate the most important character of the whole kit and caboodle in some ways. Great voice actors. He had 3 that really stand out to me. Excuse me. 2 in particular. I think Patrick Zimmerman is a great voice actor. Again, Troy Baker is probably one of the greatest of all time. And Josh Keaton is a brilliant goddamn voice actor. But I mean, there's so many moments that stand out. I used to do the jester he did in his, I guess it would be his youngest appearance in the series, with a buddy of mine. I have a huge gripe with how they finished him off, and I'll probably talk about that in my greatest video game moments of all time. But my number 1 villain of all time, if you haven't figured it out by now, especially if you don't know the voice actors, is Revolver Ocelot, Adamska, Shalashashka, Liquid Ocelot, whatever you want to call him. He is my favorite villain of all time. At times he is a friendly rival, at times he is an actual ally. I mean, he goes through the whole spectrum over the course of his lifetime in the Metal Gear Solid series. By the way, he's also in Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid 4, Metal Gear Solid 5. I believe he made an appearance in Portable Ops, and sort of made an appearance in Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. And I mean, I could literally do a list. Maybe I'll do that. Why the hell not? Of the greatest Revolver Ocelot moments of all time. But just one of the most well thought out, well written, juicy background, juicy everything villains, ever written in anything, even in movies. And the thing about Metal Gear, that if you've never played it, go out and watch someone just play all the games and you'll be blown away. Every game is a goddamn movie. I mean, Hideo Kojima is a legend for a reason, and a lot of that has to do with how cinematic the games are. Honestly, it's more like watching a movie that you can play, that you can interact with, and a lot of that has to do with how well written it is, how incredible the voice acting cast is. Chris Zimmerman Salter, which is actually older Ocelot's ex-wife, I believe, has been responsible for the voice casting, and she is an incredible voice caster. pretty much the who's who of voice acting has always ended up being in the games. And like I said, every single one, because you have Josh Keaton doing Major Ocelot, Troy Baker doing, I don't know if he's necessarily Revolver Ocelot at this point, but Ocelot here, and then Chris Zimmerman doing, at this point right here is Liquid Ocelot, but older Ocelot. I'm sure there's compilations out there of the greatest moments of his, existence in the games. I just recommend watching it and you will see. But one of my biggest regrets is, or one of my, not regrets, but one of my biggest gripes is the final battle you have with him was pre-experiencing this portion of Revolver Ocelot, and I think that was a missed opportunity. I wish number 4, which is supposed to be the end, Metal Gear Solid 4, I wish that would have legitimately been the end. I thought they did such a great job of sending up the series. So then when they started throwing in like the in-betweens, it was like, that's my only probably real criticism with the Metal Gear Solid series. I don't know. Like I said, I'll explain it more if I go about doing that, or I probably will go about doing that with my greatest video game moments of all time. But I mean, my video game life has revolved around this man in particular. And yes, Solid Snake for sure, but Solid Snake did not exist during this era of Revolver Ocelot, but Revolver Ocelot was there. Hell, I don't even think he existed during this time period. He was a kid when this Revolver Ocelot existed. Ocelot has kind of been there through it all, and I would argue in some ways, it's just like a lot of people argue that the Star Wars series was technically, the original one at least, the first 6, was technically based around Darth Vader more than anything. It was Darth Vader's story. In a lot of ways, this is kind of Ocelot's story, if you really think about it. And like I said, I would debate it. I just gotta find someone else that knows the game well enough, but I would debate this. Those Metal Gear Solid games were actually based more around Ocelot than anything. But anyways, that's why he is my all-time favorite villain. Originally, didn't even think he was going to amount to anything after the first game, and boy, did they take him to another level. But there we go. That is my top 10 villains of all time. I will obviously do top 10 heroes, I guess, or heroines, or might be more than 10, but I'm going to try to keep it to 10. It's kind of a fun, interesting challenge in some ways. And then we have other things, like I said, top video game moments of all time. And I am working on my top 100 video games of all time. So we'll see where those go. But as always, hopefully you all are staying safe. Things are getting crazy again here in the States, especially around where I'm at in the Bay Area. So I hope you all are safe wherever you're at. And hope you have a great holiday coming up. My birthday actually is coming up next week, so I get to experience that and Thanksgiving. And like I said, if you want to post your top list, by all means, I would be really curious to see. I mean, you might throw out a game I have never even heard of, and I'll have to check it out. But otherwise, until then, I am the Crapit Gamer. Thank you for watching, and we will see you all in the next video. Until then, toodaloo.